I'm Chris.
I'm Billy.
We're part of OU, and we're looking at a series of Christian essentials, basic teachings of the faith, and this is one on the Lord's Prayer.
Temptation. Let's talk about it. That's a little weird. Yeah, whatever. Let's do it. Lead us not to temptation. I start satirically, but it's serious stuff. Lead us not to temptation and deliver us from evil. Immediate thoughts. What do you think?
I think this is one of the, the most mysterious parts of the prayer to me.
Okay. How so?
It just lead us not into temptation, but I guess raises the question, does God lead people into temptation?
Sure.
I think the answer from my perspective is clearly no. God doesn't lead us into temptation. But rather, there are places in our life. I don't think God desires to tempt us. I think that there are situations that we find ourselves in where we experience temptation, where we experience testing. There's a moment in Jesus' life immediately after he is baptized, he's led into the wilderness by the Spirit. And in the wilderness, he fasts for 40 days and nights and experiences temptation, experiences trial and test.
Yeah, I think what's important for me to realize is that God is not the source of the temptation. And we see that in a story of Christ in the wilderness, that the source of temptation is Satan. It is the evil one. It's the devil who is trying to slightly bend the truth of Scripture to coax Jesus away from what God's true intent is. And I think that's important to recognize. So this whole idea of not being led into temptation, I think of the verse 1 Corinthians 10:13. I'm going to read it. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." He can provide a way out. What is that way out? If someone asked you, what is the way out of temptation? What would be your immediate reaction?
Well, I guess, coming back to the example of Christ in the wilderness, I think there's a sense that the adversary, the tempter, the evil one, there are different moments of my life I've struggled with that reality. I've come to think of it as quite real, though, not in a red man with horns and a pointy stick or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
But I do think of it as an ever-present reality in my life, and it's temptation or test that what the adversary would use for our destruction and ruin, God uses in a different way. It's not that God tempts us, but rather that experiences of trial and test can be used by God to strengthen us, to sanctify us, and ultimately glorify us. I think that there's a sense of the endurance that's possible is something that God can use to strengthen and fortify our will and desire. Of course, that's very difficult in terms of how you do that. I was hoping that you would tell me.
Yeah, well, sure. So for me, it's important for me to believe that the devil is a real person. I believe that. I believe it's a true entity. I truly do believe that. And I feel like I've struggled with him in my own life, frankly. And I think that's my perspective. So for me, I need to look to the Scriptures to see kind of God's advice, which he gives plenty of what it means to resist the devil. It says, paraphrasing, I should memorize the Scripture, whatever. But it's the Scriptures say, draw closer to the God and he will draw closer to you and the devil will flee, kind of as we kind of open ourselves up to God. So that's what does that look like practically, right? I think another verse I think of is taste and see that the Lord is good. When I think of the way out of temptation that Corinthians speaks of, I think it needs to come with two things. One, recognizing and relying on the provision of God, recognizing and relying on the beauty and the transformative power of God, and that he has something to offer that is way more than anything this world can offer, anything that the forces of evil, whatever you want to call them, can offer. But two, and we mentioned this in an earlier edition of this, that we're called to fall in love with God's reality, and that really the way to push back against sin. So from my experience, I know there have been times where I'm struggling big time with some sort of sin, whatever it may be. In the times where I spiritually beat myself up thinking you need to be better, you suck, just do better, Billy. It didn't work. I would get caught up in that same addiction or whatever it may be. when I saw true transformation, when I saw a way out, was when I recognized that Jesus was doing much more than saying, don't do that. He's saying, step into this. He's saying, step into the vision of the kingdom that is the opposite of this sin. So we fight sin, we flee from temptation by falling in love with the alternative to sin, falling in love with the abundance of life, whether it be, like sexual sin, falling in love with a self-giving, a committed love when it comes to pushing back against the sin of greed, falling in love with equity, with justice, where a world where everyone has what they need. When we talk about, dealing with a sin of overindulgence or gluttony, whatever you want to use, falling in love with healthy, life-giving boundaries, healthy, life-giving decisions that make us the best person we can be. It's long and drawn out, but essentially, the way to flee from temptation is to recognize the abundance of what God has to offer. And there's a bunch of practical steps you can engage to do that, but it just starts with recognizing that God is for you. God is abundant in mercy, and that we have to fall in love with him by drawing near to him and seeing his goodness and tasting his goodness.
I think that's right. I think it's good. I mean, I don't think I have anything to add. I think doing it repetitively, daily, it's a practice. It's not something that you can flee from. It's not a one and done. It's something that you'll engage all your life. You'll fail. I think the question is not, do I mess up in one particular moment or give into a temptation now, but rather, are you being drawn forward into something that at the end of your life, as you kind of look back over the whole of your days, are you moving closer towards Christ? Are you, I guess, dying to sin and living to Christ day by day? We do need to discuss evil. It's a deeper matter. Why don't we do that in the next conversation?
Yeah, stay tuned.